Hi, welcome to the BAME on the Move Leadership Ladder podcast. Today's guest is Stephen Akinsanya. He's a barrister who has a modern approach and an independent practice in law. He specializes in criminal law. He's appeared in numerous high-profile criminal cases and has even been representing in the Supreme Court. Our topic today is race equality within the court system. We'll be talking about violent crime and what happens in the criminal justice system to those that are caught up. Stephen, welcome to today's podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Roy. Nice to have you be a guest. I'm grateful. Thank you.
I think it would be helpful just for viewers to get a bit of an understanding about you. So if you could tell me a bit about Stephen Akinsanya, a bit about your background and why you ended up becoming a barrister and your journey towards that.
Okay, well, I grew up in Bristol, which has been in the news in the last few weeks, but then soon after relocated with my parents, my family, to Thornton Heath in Croydon. And that's where I was raised, effectively went to school there. And my first interest, I guess, in law came about by me watching a program that was on at the time called Crown Court, which was a great source of inspiration to me. And I think that was where my interest in law was born. And I didn't really know much about it, but I just liked what I saw on TV, the court dress, the way people spoke, the arguments, the closing speeches, that all appealed to me. And that's where, yeah, my interest in law was born, I would say.
Okay. So your interest is born. I imagine you've gone through the academic system and you've got your qualifications. From my understanding, the next step would be for you to get a training contract.
For barristers it's called pupillage. Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, after your vocational course, your academic part of your training, you then have to try and get a pupillage. And even back then, they were like gold dust. I mean, you had so many people chasing, very few places in a barrister set of chambers. So it was highly competitive.
Yeah, so if you could just maybe speak to a bit about what type of competition you're up against, because I imagine a while back, although things have kind of evened out now in terms of equal opportunities and people being able to progress through the academic system, I imagine it might have been one black Stephen against many others trying to get that contract. How did you manage to break free, and did you find it daunting in any way?
Yeah, it was daunting. I mean, you typically were in competition with a lot of other young people who had perhaps been to a better school than you, had better A-level results, better degree results. All of those things were taken into account. And so you almost had not quite an inferiority complex, but you were certainly concerned that you might not be considered to be as good as your counterparts. And then, of course, with color as a factor as well, you always had that in the back of your mind. And I can tell you stories of places where I applied to where I didn't get a look in, or other places where I went for the interview and they were very strange interviews, focusing on more of questions of where I originally came from than what attributes I had or what I could bring to chambers. But I was very fortunate in that I did secure a pupillage in a set of chambers. It was a 12-month pupillage, and I was very, very fortunate to get what we call a funded pupillage. So I had some income whilst I was training.
Okay. I imagine it took quite a bit of resilience in order for you to persevere, get through those strange interviews, but still keep your eye on the prize. So
yeah. I mean, a lot of that was born out of. I guess a lot of people see you, after 26 years in the profession, and they consider you to be successful, even if you don't think that of yourself, and they think it's a smooth journey. But I guess because of the journey that I had in terms of I failed exams. I struggled with my O levels to get the grades I needed. And I had to persevere to get those O levels. I then took 3 A levels, which I struggled with to get the really high grades to get to the universities that I wanted to study law. And I remember back in those days that I was doing my A level resits by night school whilst having a full-time job. So when you remember those struggles and what your ultimate goal is, it drives you on, because one thing I was determined to do was to reach that goal to become a barrister. And because of these challenges, even at bar school, it wasn't an easy ride because I had to resit a couple of exams. So I should have been called a year earlier to the bar, but I had to wait a year. And I remember that crushing feeling going up to what was then the Inns of Court School of Law and looking on the board and not seeing my name in that first year and feeling
Oh,
absolutely devastated. But within a few weeks, I picked myself up, dusted myself down, and said, I'm going to do this. And fortunately, I got there.
I imagine. So once you get your pupillage and you're starting to gain some experience, there must have been instances where you felt a bit of imposter syndrome, or not, depending on what your character's like. But just trying to put myself into your shoes. I'm a young upstart. I'm starting to get familiar with being in the courtroom, starting to get familiar with actually making a legal argument.
Yeah.
I struggle enough thinking about presenting to thousands of people, or just over the airways where a lot of people can't even see me, let alone having someone's fate hanging in your hands. How did you get past that imposter syndrome? How did you build your confidence?
I think, well, you're right. I did have imposter syndrome, and I was absolutely petrified because when I put my wig and gown on and I entered the courtroom, it then dawned on me after doing my pupillage that, look, this is real now. I'm being entrusted to represent somebody and to stand up in a courtroom with everyone watching me and listening to my every word. And I need to perform. I need to be on point. I need to know what I'm talking about. Because there was always this thing in the back of my mind that people are watching you. People are waiting to see what you're going to say. And also, right at the back of my mind were my parents, who always told me that, look, you are an ambassador to your family. So I didn't want to embarrass them. I didn't want to embarrass me with all the years of sacrifice that they made to get me where I got to. I had that in the back of my mind. And once I stood up and started speaking, then I just then switched to a mode of confidence, thinking, you know what, I can do this. I've got a lot to learn, but I really can do this. And once I kept that sort of air of humility, then that sort of countered any nerves that I had.
Yeah, I can imagine sometimes you just go into game mode, especially once you start experiencing some positive feedback
Yeah.
in those situations. So now you're an established criminal barrister. Um, Obviously, you're in the world where at the moment we've got these trends with regards to knife crime, with regards to people getting caught up in violent crime, county lines, people trying to recruit people to sell drugs for them, and all types of criminal activity that are not just glorified in music, but evident in today's society in terms of the judgments that you see in the newspapers. What's that experience been like for you? Have you seen trends, and what's the experience like actually being in the court?
Well, I mean, I have to preface what I say by saying it's a section of our young people who sadly are caught up in this kind of criminal activity for all manner of reasons. It's not a one answer to say, well, this is why they do it. But it's heartbreaking. I'm very passionate about youth development and empowerment and fulfilling dreams. And I guess it's because of my own failures and then success that I'm very keen to see other young people succeed in what they're trying to do, or be given hope to aspire to do something. So when I'm in the courtroom and I see young people involved in you know, knife crime, gun crime, drug offences. I just get really upset that they are effectively wasting their lives or wasting the opportunities or not being given the opportunities and finding themselves embroiled in a life of crime, which only leads down two distinct roads: longer and longer prison sentences, or effectively ending up dead.
Yeah, yeah. It's
You know,
it's really crazy because really I look at it from the outside in. Coming up myself, I found myself in a situation where, yeah, I had friends that were involved in crime. I had opportunities to get involved in it myself. I was kind of supporting myself from a young age, and you kind of get to a crossroads where you're like, all right, what should I do here? And luckily for me, I had an academic route to follow, but I've seen friends that have gone that have um, ended up doing long-term stretches in prison just because they didn't really explore other avenues for themselves at a younger age. And I know how easy it is to be in that situation where you're surrounded by temptation and you're looking at your immediate prospects and you're thinking, all right, I really like trainers. It might take me a month to get one pair of trainers. Whereas if I start getting involved in things that have quite a bit of risk, potentially I can get whole outfits. I can get the kudos that comes with it. What is that? What you think is driving these individuals? What do you think is causing this trend in violent crime?
I think it's a combination of things. I think there are issues with upbringing, value of education, a materialistic world where people are valued by the things they have and what they wear, as opposed to the substance of their character and the education that they've got. And we live in a very I want it now society. So delayed gratification, people don't know what that means. They want it now. And there are people who will do anything to have those things. But it's also people who are deprived, people who feel they have no out, no economic future. And so they see themselves in a position where they comfort themselves or give themselves these material things in order to provide them with some level of success. I've made it because I've got this watch, I've got
Yeah,
these trainers, I've got this tracksuit, I drive this car,
yeah,
not knowing that it's, you know, building longevity is far better, because at any one moment those things can be taken away from you, either through the detection of criminal activity or someone else trying to get what you've got. And so, you know, I think it's a combination of those factors.
I think also there's this element of ego, especially when it comes to violent crime. Um, Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the escalation that will happen if somebody feels slighted is crazy these days. Whereas before, when I was growing up, someone disrespects you or says something you don't like, I don't know, you might have a fight. You and your friends might jump the person, or you might, and then you find out, oh my gosh, that's not the way to do things. But these days, it seems as though the escalation is crazy. So someone says something you don't like, or someone posts a message that you don't like, then you start looking for a weapon. Um, I don't know if you've seen that type of trend as well, in that the reactions and how people are, how fragile young people's egos are when they feel slighted is just gone through the roof.
Yeah, and if you look at, you know, some of the cases I've been involved in, the tragedy is that people are murdered because someone looked at them funny or someone said something about them on social media. If someone feels slighted and they've got to teach them a lesson, egos involved, because, you know, your brethren might be laughing at you because so and so said something about you and you've got to represent. And I don't know what's happened. Some may say, well, it was always that way, but I don't believe it was or has been always been that way. Certainly when I was growing up in Thornton Heath, I don't remember these sorts of things happening in our community. So I'm going to ask the question, why? Why are we so quick to become angry? Our young people, why do they become so angry and ready to resort to violence, which has life-changing consequences for everybody, not just the two individuals involved, but it's a mushroom effect. It affects families on both sides. The communities are wounded, and this is why I'm so passionate about trying to combat and speak out to the youth, to say, look, think before you act. I've even thought about some kind of youth dispute resolution, where people learn the art of discussion, negotiation, to try and speak and talk things out, because that requires a lot of skill. So it
Yeah.
requires a lot of skill to use your intellect to challenge someone, to argue with someone without picking up a weapon. After all, that's what we do in the courtroom.
Yes.
We don't resort to fists and kicking or punching to win our cases or win an argument. We use the art of persuasion.
It's almost like reaction management to a certain degree.
Yeah,
So, like say for example, I've spoken to solicitors and that defend people that find themselves being treated wrongly by the police, and what they're always strong advocates for is trying to educate the youth so that they have a plan when they're stopped by the police, so they understand what might happen, what you should do in response to that situation, how
yeah,
potentially you can react if your peers start getting a little bit hot under the collar. Maybe diffuse the situation. Maybe diffuse the situation if the police person's getting a bit hot under the collar. It's that reaction management that it doesn't really seem to be something that we're learning or we're teaching our youngsters. It's almost reactionary. All right, something happens. Oh, you should have done X. You should have done Y, rather than prepping them for a potentially dangerous situation.
absolutely. And I'm a strong advocate on both sides for police knowing how to interact with young people, the way in which you approach people. You'll get a far better response from people if you approach them in a humane way. And equally, I tell the youngsters that, listen, and as you've just said, Roy, you got to think this thing through. People are perceiving that you're going to behave in a certain way, react in a certain way. Well, you can take a lot of the wind out of it by doing just the opposite. And so I always say to people, look, if you unfortunately are stopped by the police or one of your friends is, rather than trying to ramp it up to give that reaction which they expect, which then triggers the next thing that happens, try the other method. Try to diffuse it by using your intellect, because it's not what they expect, and
Yeah,
that way, people then think, actually, well, I'm being asked a question here. Why am I being stopped? Why do you say I look like someone who's just committed a crime down the road?
yeah,
What's the basis? You can start having a dialogue,
yes,
and you put the officer who's a rogue officer, because it's not all police officers, but the police officer who's a rogue officer, who's determined to have an issue with you, then has to think. And I'm
yeah,
only using, the example of what I've seen, what I've advised people to do, and the sole occasion when I have been stopped by the police. I got out of my car and I asked the officer a few questions in a very polite manner. I don't think he was expecting it, and the matter ended. That was
yeah,
it.
yeah,
We
yeah.
have to find a way of dealing with these situations, because butting heads together is just counterproductive on both sides. And as I say, this is a dialogue that I'm having with the police as well as youngsters.
Um, so for me, my understanding of the current situation in terms of the trends, what's going on in terms of violent knife crime and just violent crime generally, comes from people telling me what's happened to their friends and family, what I see in the news, what I hear in music, what my younger friends tell me they have to go through when they go to an area that they're unfamiliar with. Your experience is totally different, in that you're actually there beside them when their lives are hanging in the balance. It'll be helpful just to understand a bit about what you've seen in terms of what goes on inside the courtroom, what happens when someone's got to identify a body, what types of things someone experiences when they're held in the courtroom before they come out and give their testimony. What happens? Give us an insight.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, you know, the reality of the case being what it is always brought home when I see the young person's lifeless body on a morgue table, and that really brings it home that this is the kind of case that you're doing. And then you meet the young person who's been charged with that murder, and I think they for the first time appreciate that this is real. This isn't like some video game you're going to stop, or you watching a drama. You're in the drama, and it's real life. It's not script. And I get to see these youngsters who, don't forget, these are teenagers. Some of these youngsters are as young as 12, and you can imagine 12 years old, you'd be in the park playing football with your mates, or in the playground in secondary school doing the same thing. But these guys are now in the courtroom, in an adult courtroom, with grown-up adults, with a jury, with a senior judge, a very intelligent prosecutor, very experienced prosecutor, and it's real. And I see them petrified when they have to give evidence, or the moment before they have to give evidence, when they're wondering, what do they say? How do they say it? They're trying to make sure that they're articulate enough to persuade those 12 people who don't know them that they're telling the truth. They're hoping. You can see the beads of sweat literally forming on their brow.
Yeah.
Sometimes their hands are shaking because you're literally fighting for your life. And they take that stand. For the first time, they're wearing a suit, maybe for the first time, or the last time they did, it was Confirmation Sunday or something like that, because they're trying to give a good impression of themselves. That I'm not the type of guy who would stick a knife in somebody and run away, or find it funny. And I see all of these things, all the bravado soon goes, even though there may be some messing around at the early stages of the case. All the bravado, all the life is sucked out the closer you get to that verdict. And on that day, when you get that verdict, when the jury forewoman or foreperson stands up and they're asked have they reached the verdict upon which they're all agreed, and in that next instance that your whole life is going to change for good, that your mother's looking, your relatives are all looking on anxiously. And when that person says guilty, then that this is real, and that what follows means years and years and years of uncertainty in the prison system, which I can't even imagine serving one day in prison, let alone 15 to 25 years. That's the reality of it. That is the reality of it. I get to see it. I get to feel the emotion. I get to see the tears. I get to see the anxiety. And these are the things that, young people won't want to share with their friends. And they'll say, yeah, I'm fine. I'm doing okay. But I'm sure, and I've even spoken to some of them, that when they got back to their cell in a prison, they've wept because they realized that this is real.
Yeah, like you say, in many instances, they're going to be in prison longer than they've actually been alive for how they reacted in one instance.
Absolutely. And, you encapsulate what I tell them. I say to them, do you realize that you have the potential now, this is before the verdict's delivered, that you have the potential to serve a term of imprisonment longer than you have been alive? And I always ask them this question: do you remember your last Christmas? And they always say, yeah, I remember it. I say, well, can you imagine the next 17 to 25 when you're not going to be at home?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my gosh, because when you break it down in those terms, what life in prison can mean, with a tariff of 15 to 20 years. So, you're coming out as a 15-year-old, you're coming out in your 30s. And that's even if they decide to let you go, because the parole board will decide whether or not you are free to go back and mingle amongst the public? Are you still a risk to the public? You know, and these are the things that, you know, a young mind, which is not fully developed, they cannot comprehend. And so my whole issue is, listen to what I'm telling you before you have to meet me. Because
Yeah.
by the time you meet me, it's almost, and I use this phrase, it's like Russian roulette. I can't guarantee what is going to happen, but why would you gamble with your life? I don't care how tough your life might be outside. It cannot be comparable to spending 20, 15 years or more in prison. It can't be.
When you say listen to what I'm telling you, I imagine you're talking about early intervention. So the work
Yeah,
that you do to try and avoid people getting into that situation in the first place. What type of things are you
absolutely.
involved with?
Well, I'm a strong advocate of this message. You know, it all stemmed from a murder case that I did recently, and a young man was acquitted of murder, and I decided to take that young man under my wing to sort of mentor him, because I remember saying to him, "Listen, son, you've just been given your life back," and I said, "Now I want you to go out there and be the man you were supposed to be." And you know, that inspired me with my earlier work as a mentor to say, look, you know what, I want to reach out to as many young people in as many schools across the London boroughs to say to them, listen, I've been in this criminal justice system as a professional for nearly, it's coming up for 30 years soon. And I'm telling you that this system is no place for you. And I want to tell you how the system works and what will happen to you once you enter it at what I call the top tier of criminal offending. I'm not talking of, you know, a little bit of cannabis possession. I'm talking about manslaughter, murder, which sadly too many of our young people are doing. And I'm going to tell you what really happens. I'm going to tell you about how the law works to satisfy that jury that you were guilty. So things like joint enterprise, bad character evidence, what happens when witnesses who perhaps are intimidated to come to court are given proper protection by the court so that they can give their evidence to say what they saw or who did what. I'm going to tell you how it works because I defend young people.
Is so is this intervention working? And in situations where, say, for example, someone got really close to catching a case and going down for a very long time, but managed to escape due to lack of evidence or whatever it might be, are you seeing rehabilitation? So it's a bit of a twofold question. So one, does the intervention techniques you use work? Are you finding that you're getting through to these individuals? And the other part of the question is, those that come close to catching a serious case and manage to get away with it, are they returning to those dodgy situations, or are you seeing people actually being scared straight, for want of a better expression?
It's difficult to quantify how successful it is. But, you know, I work on the premise that even if I touch one life, then it's been worth it. Clearly, I mean, from the people I've represented for very serious crime, who've been acquitted, the fact that they've not come back, the fact that I don't know that they've been in trouble again tells me that they have learnt a very important lesson just going through the process. But of course, you're going to find those who think that they've beaten the system.
Yeah.
And you're going to find those who think that, well, I got away with it, so I can try this again. But eventually, your luck runs out, and you'll come back before the courts, and you might not be so lucky next time. You know, at the end of the day, it's a personal decision for people what they want to do and how they want to live their lives. But I'd like to think that if you've been through the criminal justice system at the top tier of for an offence of murder and all the anxiety that it brought and the heartache that it brought to your family and loved ones, that you would have learned that salutary lesson. So, you know what, I'm never going to get involved or even be accused of anything like this because I don't want to spend a day in prison. I'm worth so much more. I've got more to give. I've got things I need to be doing, and being in prison is not it.
Yeah, well, obviously we're living in an environment now where we're all being touched by the Black Lives Matter initiative. So we've seen the reaction to injustice in America taking away, making its impression globally. We've seen a corporation making pledges to racial equality, and there are some saying that we're at the cusp of real change. What are your thoughts? Are we on the cusp of long sustainable change, or is there a lot more to do? What do you think about the Black Lives Matter movement? What do you think is going to occur as a result of it?
Well, I'd like to think that, on the back of what happened in the US and Black Lives Matter and the various demonstrations and marches, that behind all of that is a clear plan as to how we're going to improve the lot for Black people. And I don't like the term BAME, so I'm not going to use it. But my concern is that, when people say, oh, we're on the cusp of something really changing, I'd like to think that that's true. But when I think about where the impetus came from, i.e. America, how much change has really happened there with all the marches that they've had over, the last 50, 60 years, how much change has actually occurred. And I'm even astounded to say that we're having this conversation in the 21st century. But countering that, I'm pleased that corporations and companies and individuals are being forced to think about their own perception of being racist, what racist means, how Black people are treated, either through overt or covert racism. And I'd like to think that we will, as a community, put ourselves in a position where we are ready. We are ready to take up positions when they're offered. We're ready to make our voices heard. And we're ready to stand together as a community, because my view is that we will only see real progress when we actually all stand together with a clear agenda of what we want and how we want to achieve it, in order to have sustained progress, not just a moment, but it's sustained. And remember, we're doing this not for ourselves so much, but we're building a legacy for the next generation to come.
So if, for example, you were given an opportunity to speak to influencers and leaders that are trying to galvanize support and affect this change, what types of things would you advise them to put in their plan? What sorts of infrastructure decisions would you want to see these movements making, so that we can actually realize something long term?
First of all, I think we need to, I would encourage them to make real inroads into education, because to me, education is at the key of all of it. That if our young people value education and they're properly taught, we are also in a position where, if the school curriculum won't educate our children about our history, then we should do it. We should do it outside the curriculum. I think we should also understand the importance and teach our young people the importance of fiscal responsibility, the importance of economic power, the importance of business, strong business, community supporting strong business, community supporting education. I think we also need to have a conversation about the importance of the way in which we discipline our children, our parenting. Because when I was growing up, there seemed to be a level where we were all on the same page in terms of parenting our children, what we expected of them. But what I find now is that there's a level of disrespect in our community by some of our young people, even to members of our community, to their elders. And I'm thinking, well, if you don't abide by those traditional African and Caribbean values, which came back from the African continent and the Caribbean, that's the way our parents were raised. We've lost that. We've allowed perhaps westernization to replace it. So when our young people don't feel that they need to respect you, how on earth are they going to respect anybody else? How are they going to respect themselves? And when that happens, you have chaos. I think we also need to look at being more involved in the education sector. And by that, I mean more Black teachers, more Black male teachers. I think we need to get involved in the runnings of the school in terms of school governors, finding out how a school works so that we understand and we can challenge why our young people are being excluded disproportionately more than any other group of young people. Because I know from my experience that young people who are excluded, who end up in pupil referral units, are almost guaranteed to find themselves involved in some kind of criminal behavior. And sadly, as I spoke to a police officer today, a young man found himself murdered as a result of being excluded from school. So those are just some of the things that I think we need to do in our community for ourselves. And I think we look at other communities and how it's worked for them. Don't forget, we've been here a long time, you know. We have been here a long time, a lot more than a lot longer than the Eastern Europeans, the Asians. We've been here a long time. So we need to start asking ourselves the question, are we going to keep asking the government for help? Are we going to keep banging the drum about wanting people to do something for us? Or are we going to take up the reins and say, you know what, we're going to implement how we fix these issues whilst you work out whether you are a supporter of racism or not? These are the real conversations that we have to have.
Yeah, you make a valid point about waiting. So people get excited that corporations are making pledges for racial equality and that there's media recognition for it being a cause that's worth championing. But there's a lot that people can do that is within their own circle of influence, like uniting. I know previously you mentioned about working to make inroads with local authority. So
Yeah,
say if we will fund it. If you provide the space, we will
yeah,
run it.
yeah.
Could you expand a bit more about your thinking about how people can maybe take charge of their local community?
Yeah. Well, I remember when we had the issue with the knife crime pandemic, when it started, before the pandemic that is COVID, and everyone was talking about, you know, the closing of uh, youth centers, nowhere for the young people to go. And I was incensed, even also when we had the government with the gimmick with the chicken boxes, and the anti-knife crime slogan. Um, and I was thinking, well, you know what? Look, we can keep asking, as I say, for help. But if various communities within our boroughs said, you know what, we can identify a building that used to be a youth centre or a communal place for young people to go that is now closed, or even a church. And you know what, in our community, we're going to have someone stand up and say, we're going to run a campaign, a pledge, where every household that has voting rights, because that's how they send out the voting cards, every household, if they donated £1, every household, £1, that money could be put together, taken to use to the council and say, look, we want to utilize a building. If you want us to pay for it, reluctantly we will. We shouldn't have to, but if you're saying that there's no money in the local government coffers, well, we'll pay for it because the community's raised this money. And we want to have access to that building at a reduced rate, and we will provide our own staff, we will provide our own facility in terms of what we want to use it for, and it could be a safe haven for vulnerable children in our community to go after school or at weekends. It could also double up as a place where young people are taught skills, people like me who are willing to volunteer on a rota to give up their time to educate the youth about professions, things they're interested in, the things that they need, the importance of what I call the tertiary education, the importance of having maths and English, a place for young people to go where they might not feel so intimidated, or they might need to be able to speak to someone who's professionally trained. If we could have hubs like this in every borough of London, where local communities are supporting it, then that would be a great start. Because you know what? The black pound, and I say the black pound inverted commas, is valued. We spend our money on all sorts of things in the community. We give our money to so many different things. We could equally do the same in our own community for the things that really matter to us. And I'm not talking the king's ransom, because people are at different levels of affordability in terms of their economics and uh, fiscal freeness to do so. But I'm talking of small sums of money, because we have to say what really matters to us. You know, we
Yeah,
spend a fortune on our hair products. We spend a fortune on our beauty products. We spend a fortune on buying our trainers, on our clothes, a nice ride. Nothing wrong with any of that. But what really matters to us as a community, we're saying Black Lives Matter and we're a community. Let's show each other what we actually mean. Let's stand together and let's do for ourselves. I believe in doing for self first.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
the way I was raised. Do
yeah,
for self first before you go and ask people for help. Try
yeah,
yourself first. And I guarantee you, when the powers that be can see you galvanizing, just as other communities have done, they sit up and they take notice. They sit up and they take notice, and they may even want to match you in what you're doing. Just like the parent who says to the child, well, you know what, if you want to buy a house, you come up with your 50% and I'll come up with the rest. Now, it's not the perfect analogy because we're not children. But what I'm meaning to say is that if we show that we are serious, rather than just waiting, as we've waited for so long, for the help of a government, for people to help us, let's help ourselves first.
I couldn't agree with that more. Um, a little bit earlier in your response to the question, you mentioned the chicken box gimmick. What was your view on that government initiative? The one where they put stories in chicken boxes for teenagers and young people to maybe learn a moral while they're eating their Dallas chicken or whatever it might be. What were your thoughts on that? Were they totally on the wrong path, barking up the wrong tree?
I would love to know who they spoke to before they came up with that. Did they speak to people in the community as to whether or not it was a good idea? Because what they're saying, if they're targeting us as a community, well, we know black people like their chicken, they like their fried chicken. So let's put some moral or something written on the inside of a box and hope that they read it. When you and I know that most young people who buy chicken are not going to be reading what's on a chicken box, very few, if any. They're going to eat their chicken wings and throw the box in the bin or even on the floor. I don't know who they consulted, but they certainly, in my view, I may be wrong, they didn't consult us. And this is always the problem. People
Yeah,
come up with novel ideas of how we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but who do they consult to consider whether it's actually a valid and viable idea that will work? What I would like to have seen was a proper initiative where they reached out to various people in the community. Because, you know, in our community, we have people doing great things, all manner of great things, people who are running successful businesses, people in the city, people who are doctors, lawyers, accountants, neurosurgeons, right here in the UK. But the problem with that is that our young people are not exposed to them. And because they're not exposed to them, they do not believe that they can aspire to be those people. But I believe in aspiring to inspire. And so I would have loved to have seen an initiative where people reached out to the various mentoring groups that we have already who are doing great things in London and across the country and said, we want to engage certain individuals to now go out to the communities or even make short pilot videos and put them up on billboards. Something better than chicken boxes,
yeah.
you know?
Who come better than that? No, that's a key point there again. Just that disconnect between what the government might perceive to be a way to communicate with the black youth and ways that are actually effective to do so.
Yeah.
I think just to kind of conclude our interview, I think it'll be really interesting to hear what your message would be to that young person that's potentially on the crossroads, as I found myself when I was a younger individual. Maybe someone that's got an ability to progress to be as esteemed as yourself, but is in certain ways being drawn in by the allure of crime, or maybe just the culture itself. What would your advice be to that individual, and what would your advice be to the parent of that individual?
My advice would be to the youngster, look, you are so much better than what you think you have right now. And you have the opportunity to build a longevity, which means you're not looking over your shoulder. You're not worrying about where the next thing is going to come that's going to give you the material things you seek. You're building something on a firm, proper foundation. And if no one's ever told you, I'm telling you that you've got all the tools in the box. And if you don't know how to use those tools to build a better life, I'm going to show you how to do it. And if I don't have all the answers, I'm going to show you the people who can help you. Because at the end of the day, what you have is so much more and worth so much more, not only to you, but to your family. Because at the end of the day, what you're choosing is short-lived. And I'm telling you it's short-lived because I've been there, I've seen it. I've been there and seen how destructive it is. And so you have the opportunity now at the crossroads to think, where am I going to be? Where do I want to be in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, 30 years' time? And even if I didn't have the best example set for me, if I'm blessed with children, what example do I want to set them? Do I want my children to have the lifestyle I've had thus far? There's more that you can give. There's more that you can do for yourself and for others by choosing a life that really, truly enriches you, rather than taking the short path, which effectively leads to your own destruction and that of those you claim to love. And that's what I would tell them.
And what would you say to the parent or the teacher that can potentially see signs in that individual, but has the opportunity to intervene and maybe direct them towards a different course? What words of advice would you give to that individual? I know it's not an easy task to maybe argue or try and convince someone that there's a better way to do things, but what would you say to that person, that parent or guardian or teacher?
I believe every young person has an inner desire to do something better for themselves, to be praised. Children, young people love praise. I've not yet met a young person who, when you praise them for something that they've done or the way that they've done something, that they don't see, you visibly see them puff up with a bit of pride and happiness. And I would say to a parent or a teacher to build on that. Because I remember as a young boy at school being told by the teacher that I wouldn't be a barrister. And that can be crushing. I remember being told that all I was good at was athletics, like all the other black kids, and I wouldn't accept it, and neither would my parents. So I would encourage teachers, guardians to encourage and find a way of communicating with that young person and finding the seed of excellence that they have, because they all have it in some shape or format, and telling them that they have it, and telling them how watering that seed, nurturing it, looking at it, will produce fruit. And that fruit is what will sustain you for the long term, not doing what you're doing or the road you're going down, because that is temporary. It doesn't last. And that's what I would say to them.
Really inspiring words. I feel so privileged to have a platform where you can share that message with people that actually need to hear it. What can we expect from Stephen Akinsanya going forward? It's obvious that you've got a passion to make a change. It's obvious that you haven't just got a passion, but you're rolling up your sleeves and you're getting involved. Where can we find out more about what you're doing, and what can we expect from you in the near future?
Right. So I'm currently still working on my program of prevention, something I'm very passionate about. And right now I'm talking to the youth engagement teams with the Met Police. So the plan is to reach out to every single school in the various boroughs of London, to actually encourage them to take on this prevention program. I'm also working with the Met Police and the way they engage with young people, trying to advise them as to the way in which we stop and search, youth engagement, building up trust and respect on both sides, and also working with other groups to see how we can implement a lot of the things I've talked about, so that we are doers, we are acting on things that we're all discussing, and we're not just having another conversation. We're actually physically trying to find ways of implementing those things that we know are important and that should work. So those are the things that I'm working on, and you can find out more about the work I do on my website, stephenakinsanya.com, and there's going to be more things being added, and I occasionally write things on certain blogs, on Instagram, but yeah, for now, those are the things that I'm doing, and I'm willing to engage with anybody who shares that passion, that vision, and that they want to be doers, fixers, problem solvers, rather than just having a dialogue, standing up and shouting. I'm not into that. I want now. If this is our moment, then it has to be backed up with action. And when people see action, they sit up. And when they sit up, they listen. And when they listen, they include. And then we actually start to see results.
Stephen, those are some fine words to end this podcast on. Thanks again for your time. And I wish you all the best in all of that positive work that you're doing to uplift the community and make changes.
Thank you, Roy. You take care. God bless, mate.